My own son laughed as his wife shattered my jaw with a wine bottle. Not a word of concern. Not a single hand reached out. I lay on the kitchen floor, bleeding, tasting iron, while they argued over who would get the house deed first. It wasn't the pain that broke me. It was knowing I raised the boy who stood there and watched. So I got up, quietly, and did something no one saw coming. Because if they thought I was too old to fight back, they had no idea what 70 years of silence can hold. My jaw didn't break all at once. It gave a soft pop first, then a crack that rang through my skull. The bottle hit from the side, sharp and fast, the kind of swing you'd expect from someone used to winning. My legs buckled, and I went down hard, my shoulder catching the tile as my vision blurred. I didn't scream. The pain stole the sound right out of my mouth. The floor felt cold, almost clean. I could hear the faucet running and the clink of cutlery in the sink. But what cut deeper than the blow was the voice that followed it. Now you'll learn to serve like you're supposed to. That's what she said. And Reed, my only son, standing just a few feet away, let out a dry little laugh. He didn't even come near me, just took another bite of his dinner and muttered something about how I'd ruined the evening. My blood was on their floor, but their concern was on the dessert still waiting in the fridge. I don't remember how long I laid there. The ceiling fan kept spinning above me, as if the room didn't notice what had happened. I heard my granddaughter, Miriam, calling my name once. Soft, frightened. Then her mother snapped at her to go upstairs. Footsteps ran, a door slammed. That left me, Reed, and Ashley in the kitchen. She stepped over me to get a towel. Not for me. For the wine that had splashed across the cabinet door. She crouched down, wiped it like it was just a mess to clean, then looked me right in the face. "You brought this on yourself, Ivy." I tried to speak, but my mouth wouldn't work the way it should. I tasted blood, something sharp in my teeth. It hurt to even breathe. Reed finally moved. Not to help me. He crouched down next to Ashley, kissed her temple, and whispered something I couldn't catch. She smiled. That's when I saw it. On the countertop behind them. A manila envelope with my name on it. My handwriting. But I hadn't written anything lately, my hand's not steady like it used to be. Not enough to sign pages without knowing. They had forged it. Or tricked me when I was medicated after that back surgery. Either way, they were sure it was done. Sure enough to laugh over my body and make plans for the house like I wasn't even there. They left me there and went back to eating. Just like that. I managed to crawl to the bathroom, dragged myself with one arm, the other pressed to my face. I didn't dare look in the mirror. I didn't need to. I could feel the swelling, the shift in bone. I'd seen enough injuries in my years as a nurse to know what was broken. No ambulance was called, no doctor was summoned. They knew what they were doing, hurting me just enough to shut me up, but not enough to get caught. But they misjudged one thing. I had stopped screaming a long time ago. That didn't mean I had stopped remembering. That night, I slept in the guest room. They didn't come in to check on me, didn't bring me ice or painkillers. I found an old ice pack in the mini freezer, wrapped it in a dish towel, and laid down with it pressed to the side of my face. I didn't sleep much. The pain kept waking me, but so did the thoughts. Thoughts that crawled over each other, racing toward one truth. They had taken my silence for weakness, but I wasn't weak. I had been watching, waiting, learning. At 5 in the morning, I sent one message. Just one. No explanation. No details. Just a name and an address. To Olive Wu, the only person I trusted. The one who still believed I was sharper than they all assumed. By 7, I had packed a bag and left through the back door. And now, If you've ever been made to feel like you don't matter, if you've ever been silenced in your own home, I need you to hear this. They thought they'd shut me up for good. What they did was wake something I had buried years ago. I am not done speaking, and I will not leave quietly. The motel room smelled like old coffee and lemon cleaner, the kind of place where nothing had really been clean in years, just wiped over and called good enough. I sat on the edge of the bed, a thin floral bedspread under me, my jaw stiff, swollen, and taped with gauze I bought at a gas station nearby. It was the only place open that early. I had walked there in the dark with sunglasses on to hide the bruising. There was a Bible in the drawer. I left it where it was. Not because I didn't believe in anything anymore, just because I had no time for comfort. Not yet. I needed clarity. I needed focus. The laptop took a while to power up. It was old, belonged to my late husband, and I hadn't touched it in months. But it still worked. The screen blinked twice, then settled into life. I opened the folder marked House Docs, the one I always told myself to back up but never did. The deed was there, just like I remembered it. My name, his name, signed 31 years ago, after the VA settlement came through. I scrolled slowly, looking for what I hoped to find. Clause 12. I paused, read it again, and again. In the event of the spouse's passing, the remaining title holder shall retain full ownership unless deemed mentally incapacitated by a state-certified physician. That last part. That was what they were aiming for. I reached for the small folder I had stuffed in my purse the night I left. Inside were old prescription slips, hospital records from last year's fall, even the discharge summary from my back surgery. None of them said anything about cognitive decline. But if you looked at the dates and cherry-picked the notes, someone might argue I was fragile, maybe even incapable. It wasn't just about the house. I saw that now. It was about erasing me, piece by piece, making me small enough to move around, to sign things, to stay quiet. But I wasn't signing anything. Not now. Not ever again. The email I sent Olive was brief. She didn't need a story. She needed the facts. I attached the deed. I attached my ID, the most recent medical report from my primary care doctor. The subject line read, "Start the clock." Less than 10 minutes later, she responded, "Where are you?" I sent the name of the motel and the room number. I didn't hear anything after that. But I didn't need to. I knew her. While I waited, I called the credit union, spoke as clearly as I could, though every word throbbed behind my teeth. I froze all automatic transfers. I changed the PIN on my account. I blocked online access to the joint utilities that Reed had insisted on managing for me, because it's easier that way. One by one, I unhooked their fingers from my life. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just kept moving, slow and careful. I had learned long ago that people like Ashley and Reed count on you to lose your balance. They count on you being overwhelmed. If you panic, they win. A knock came around 11, 2 sharp taps, then one soft. Olive's signal. I opened the door. She looked the same as ever. Hair pulled back, grey roots, proud and unbothered. Glasses sliding down her nose, legal pad in one hand, tablet in the other. Her eyes scanned my face, lingered on the swelling. She didn't say a word about it, just walked in and shut the door. She laid the tablet on the table, pulled out a printed copy of the deed. She had highlighted parts already. They forged a new version, transferred the title into a holding company registered 2 weeks ago. No doubt they have a notary in their pocket. The signature is shaky, but close enough. Problem is, they filed it with the county without your presence. If we can prove you were injured or under duress, this whole thing can be reversed. She looked up. But we need proof, not just of the forgery, of intent, of manipulation, of harm. I reached for my purse, pulled out a small voice recorder, clicked play. The voices came clear. Ashley, laughing. Reed, saying he would call the county first thing Monday, that Ivy wouldn't remember anything, that the deed was done, and the old woman would be in a nursing home by spring. Olive listened, her lips tightening. This is good, but not enough. We'll need visuals, photos, and if possible, any camera in the house they don't know about. There's one. I nodded slowly. It's in the kitchen clock. Reed gave it to me 3 Christmases ago. Said it syncs with the phone app. I never figured out how to use the app, but the clock always blinked red when motion happened. I bet it's still recording. Can you access it? I smiled for the first time in days. Just barely, not from here, but I know someone who can. She leaned back in the chair. Then let's move. We start building now. And Ivy, you listen to me. This time they don't get to write your ending. I sat back. The pain still there, the bruises deepening. But under all of it, a steady beat started rising in my chest. I wasn't done. I had just begun. We drove out to the county building just after noon. The air was heavy with Florida heat, thick enough to slow your thinking if you weren't used to it. But I was wide awake. My jaw ached every time I swallowed, and my bruises had turned a deep plumb along the cheekbone. But my mind had never been sharper. Every movement felt like part of a drill, one task after another, no room for feeling yet. Olive did the talking at the front desk. She introduced herself as my legal advisor, showed her old credentials, and asked for access to recent filings under my name. The clerk behind the counter barely looked up. He tapped a few keys, squinted at the screen, then said a few words that made my stomach drop. It had gone through. Reed and Ashley had filed a quitclaim deed transferring my home to something called RAS Trust, LLC. The initials couldn't be more obvious. R for Reed, A for Ashley, S for Strickland. The filing date was 2 days ago, right after the night in the kitchen. Olive took notes without saying a word. Her pen moved fast. The clerk printed a copy of the document and handed it over. There was my name at the bottom, signed in a hand that looked close enough to mine to fool someone who never saw the real thing. But to me, it was wrong. The loops too tight. The angle off. My signature always leaned right. This one leaned left. Under the signature, a notary seal. Out of county. That caught Olive's eye. She pointed at it. This notary doesn't operate in Hillsborough. That's a start. If we can find proof that you were in town that day, and that this notary never met you, we can challenge the validity. I didn't respond. I just stared at the paper. My name, my house, but not mine, not in their eyes, not anymore. Olive folded the paper and slid it into her folder. Let's take a drive. We didn't go back to the motel. We headed east, past the highway, into the quieter side of the county. A few miles out, the road dipped toward a flat stretch of land, lined with low shrubs and cracked sidewalks. I hadn't been here in years, but I remembered every turn. This land was part of the original support zone for veterans back in the 80s. My husband had applied for the grant through the state program that helped fund housing for retired military. We had both qualified. His status, my service. It took 2 years to get approval, and even longer to build. We poured everything we had into that little plot of land. And there it was. The old plaque still standing in front of the community center. Bronze worn dull, but the text readable. Veterans Housing Initiative, Joint Title Retention Clause enforced Olive. got out of the car, and took a picture. Then another of the sign posted on the corner of the lot. It was just what we needed, physical proof. A reminder that this house wasn't just property. It was protected by a promise, a condition baked into the land from the beginning. I walked around the back of the building, the sunlight burning my shoulders. I stopped at the place where we had taken our first photo after the house was built. He had stood behind me, one hand on my shoulder, a proud grin that never made it into any other picture after that. The years had worn him down, the work, the silence between us. But back then, we still believed in what we were building. I remembered the night he made me promise that no matter what happened, I would never let anyone sell that house to strangers. Not unless I wanted to. Not unless it was my decision. I had kept that promise, until now. Back in the car, Olive flipped through the property documents we had just collected. They'll try to argue that the clause doesn't hold, that the funding expired, that the grant was fulfilled. But if we prove that the original deed still contains those restrictions, they're cornered. Especially if Reed used the house as collateral for new investments. He did. I said it quietly. I heard him talking about it one night. They wanted to flip a duplex, use my place to free up equity. Olive nodded. Then we push. Not just legally, publicly. She turned to me. Do you remember the newsletter reporter from the community centre, the one you helped when she had that accident last year? I nodded. She's a blogger now, huge following. Advocacy work for elder fraud and housing rights. She would listen. We didn't say much after that. Just drove back, windows down, the air whipping past us like time trying to move faster than it should. At the motel, Olive set up a portable scanner. She digitized every paper we had, backed it up in 3 places. Then she opened a secure folder on her tablet and uploaded the recordings I gave her. I sat on the bed, fingers clasped, watching her work. There was no more doubt now, no grey area. They had crossed a line. This wasn't family business anymore. This was war. And I wasn't going to fight it with tears. I was going to fight it with evidence, with law, with the kind of patience that waits in the dark until the exact second the door opens and then walks through without fear. I wasn't done being their mother, but I was done being their victim. I didn't go back to the motel that night. Olive insisted I stay with her. Her house was small and tucked behind a row of overgrown hedges, but it felt safe. The kind of place where windows stayed open late, and the kitchen smelled like garlic and lemon and old hardwood floors. She set me up in the guest room with a fan humming in the corner and a pitcher of water on the nightstand. There were books stacked in the windowsill and a folded quilt at the end of the bed. I barely slept. Not because of the pain. That was dull now, steady and familiar. It was the sound in my head that kept me up. Reed's voice, smug and certain, echoing through my memory. The way Ashley wiped wine off the cabinet door like it was nothing. The envelope on the counter with my name in someone else's handwriting. Just after 4, I sat up and reached under the pillow where I had hidden the little voice recorder. It was a cheap plastic thing from a drawer in the guest room, the kind students use to record lectures. I had almost thrown it away years ago, but something made me keep it. I clicked through the files. Most were blank. Static, maybe a few rustling sounds. Then one clicked into place. A faint hum, then Ashley's voice, sharp and careless. You think she'll even remember signing it? Then Reed's voice followed, low and amused. She won't remember anything. She's already halfway gone. I let the recording play twice, 3 times. I memorized every word. The way they spoke about me, like I was a burden, like I was already fading. I didn't feel rage, not the kind that makes you break things. I felt something deeper, colder, a stillness that settles when you stop expecting anything good from someone and start preparing for what must be done. At 7, Olive walked into the kitchen with a mug of tea and a folder in her hand. I handed her the recorder without a word. She pressed play and sat down, the mug resting between her palms. She didn't react until the last line. "Get the damn deed filed. She won't fight us. She never fights." Then she looked up. Her voice was calm. "This is what we needed. We didn't waste time." By 10, we were back on the road, heading toward the house. Olive had borrowed a laptop from one of her old paralegal friends. She had software that could extract timestamps, compress files, and prepare everything for the archive. I watched from the passenger seat as she labeled each folder. Audio, documents, legal base, media release. She was building the case like a soldier loads a weapon. Careful, exact, without emotion. We pulled into the neighborhood just after 11. The sun was high, casting hard shadows across the driveway. Reed's car was gone. Ashley's SUV was still there. We parked 2 houses down and waited. 10 minutes later, Miriam's school bus pulled up. She stepped off with her backpack swinging and her eyes downcast. She didn't look up until she passed the mailbox. That's when she saw me. I opened the door and stepped out, careful to stay in the shade. She froze. Her hand clutched the strap of her backpack. Then she looked over her shoulder and ran straight to me. She didn't say anything, just hugged me tight around the waist and buried her face in my side. Olive stayed in the car. I leaned down and whispered, "I need your help, sweetheart." Just like before. She nodded, reached into her backpack and pulled out a flash drive. A small purple one, the kind shaped like a cartoon cat. She looked up at me with eyes that had seen too much for her age. I hid it in my pencil box so Mum wouldn't find it. I took it and slipped it into my purse. Then I walked her up to the door. Ashley didn't open it. The door was already cracked. Miriam slipped inside without a word. I turned and walked back to the car. In the drive, Olive plugged the flash drive into her laptop. The files loaded slowly. Then the screen blinked. A folder popped up labeled Kitchen Cam. Miriam had connected the camera. The footage was clear. I watched myself walking into the kitchen with the serving tray, watched the moment Ashley stood, the swing of the bottle, the fall. I saw Reed's reaction, or rather, his lack of one. It wasn't blurry or out of frame. It wasn't subtle. It was assault. Documented, time-stamped, synced to the recording on the voice recorder. Olive leaned back, her arms crossed. This is it. This is everything. We spent the rest of the day making copies, uploading to the secure drive, creating backups. Olive called her contact at the local news blog, set a meeting. She scheduled a consultation with a pro bono elder abuse attorney and filed the first inquiry with the county fraud office. All while I sat there, watching the footage again and again. Not to feel sorry for myself, not to punish myself, to remember, to stay clear. That night, I opened a new notebook. I wrote down every date, every name, every comment I could recall. I listed neighbors who had seen bruises, nurses who had treated me, even the cashier who had asked once about my black eye when I said I slipped in the shower. I wasn't just reclaiming what was mine. I was preparing to take away what they had built on lies. Let them come home to find the ground shifted beneath them. Let them wonder when the floor would fall. The invitation came by mail. A cream-colored envelope with gold trim and thick, expensive paper. My name printed in block script, no warmth in it, no sign of family. Just formality. It was an invitation to a dinner in my honor, hosted by Reed and Ashley at my own house. Olive read it twice, then folded it neatly and set it on the kitchen table. They want to control the narrative, make it look like everything's fine. I nodded. My jaw had healed enough to speak again, though I still felt a stiffness along the left side. The nerves weren't fully back, but my voice had returned. It didn't tremble anymore. We had everything we needed. The voice recording, the security camera footage, the audio from Miriam, the documents proving the deed was tampered with, and the original grant agreement linked to veteran housing clauses. Every file was backed up in 3 places, printed, encrypted, and sorted. All we needed now was the moment, and Reed had just handed it to us. The dinner was scheduled for Saturday night. Casual cocktail attire, family and friends only. Ashley included a note at the bottom about bringing a dish to share, as if the whole thing were some innocent neighborhood potluck. As if she hadn't shattered my face with a bottle less than 2 weeks ago. I didn't RSVP. I didn't call. I didn't ask for permission. I just showed up. When I stepped onto the front porch that night, Olive by my side, I wore the same navy blue dress I had on when I signed the deed to that house 31 years ago. I didn't dress it up. No makeup, no jewelry, just clean and solid. Reed answered the door, holding a wine glass, his shirt untucked like he wanted to seem relaxed. His smile twitched when he saw me. "Glad you could make it, Mum." I walked past him without a word. Ashley came from the kitchen, laughing, her voice just a little too loud. She froze when she saw Olive, then quickly plastered on a smile. "What a surprise, Ivy. So glad you're here." The house looked different, cold somehow. The walls had been repainted, furniture rearranged. My favorite chair was missing. The quilt from my bedroom was gone. Family photos replaced with abstract art that said nothing. Guests milled about, most of them strangers. A few neighbors, some old church acquaintances, people I hadn't spoken to in years. They greeted me cautiously, unsure whether to hug or avoid eye contact. No one mentioned the bruises that hadn't fully faded yet. Ashley raised her glass and tapped it lightly with a fork. "Let's all gather in the dining room for a toast." We moved slowly, people settling into chairs. I sat near the end of the table, not at the head, not at the foot. Olive stayed quiet beside me. Reed stood, holding his wine glass high. "I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight to celebrate family and transitions and fresh starts. My mother has been through a lot this year, and we're so proud to care for her as she steps into a quieter chapter." He glanced at me, smiling like a politician. Ashley clapped first. A few guests followed. I stood. The room quieted. I didn't raise a glass. I didn't smile. "I brought something tonight, too." Reed's face tightened. Ashley's fingers curled around her wine glass. I reached into my purse and pulled out the flash drive. Walked over to the television mounted on the wall and connected it to the media port. The screen blinked. The footage began. Silence fell. There I was, on camera, standing in that very kitchen. The swing of the bottle, the sound of it hitting bone. My body collapsing. Gasps. Then the audio played. Ashley's voice, clear and cruel. She won't remember a thing. Reed's voice, file the deed. She'll be in a nursing home by spring. The final frame paused on my face, swollen and bloodied, barely conscious on the tile floor. I turned slowly to face the room. This is what happened in this house. The house my husband and I built. The house paid for with our service, with our work, with our lives. This is what they did to me. Reed moved first. "This is out of context. She's twisting everything." "Mum, stop this." Ashley stood, shaking. "She's not well. This is elder confusion. She needs help." I looked directly at her. "That's not what you said the night you broke my jaw." One of the neighbours stood up and left. Another whispered something to her husband. Olive stood and handed out printed packets. In these folders, you'll find the full legal history of the property, the falsified deed, the state housing clause, and 3 separate eyewitness testimonies. Reed's voice rose, angry now. This is harassment. This is defamation. Ivy, you don't know what you're doing. I walked to the door. No, Reed, you don't know what I'm capable of. Then I left. The guests stayed. Olive stayed behind to answer questions. I didn't need to hear the rest. I had said enough. I had shown enough. And now they would feel it. The shift, the unraveling. The storm had started, and it was theirs to weather. By the time I got back to Olive's house that night, the storm had already started spreading. She was still at the dinner, fielding questions, handing out folders, keeping her voice even. But the footage had already made its way further than that room, because we didn't just show it to the guests. We had sent it to 3 people before the party even started. One to a local housing rights blog run by a former journalist who knew Olive from her courthouse days. One to the County Elder Protection Board. And one to the real estate investor network Reed had been bragging about joining. We didn't need the room to turn on him. We just needed the truth to get out. That night, I sat on Olive's back porch, blanket across my lap, and listened to the quiet. Her wind chimes rattled with the breeze. Inside, the old wall clock ticked evenly, like a metronome keeping time while everything else tilted. I didn't sleep much, but this time, it wasn't from fear. The next morning, Olive walked into the kitchen already dressed, tablet under one arm, and poured her coffee like it was any other Tuesday. "We're on the front page," she said, sliding the screen toward me. The blog headline was plain and sharp. Local veterans' home stolen in forgery scheme. Son and daughter-in-law caught on camera. The article was brutal in its honesty. It linked to the footage, summarized the grant clause, quoted experts on elder fraud, and featured a still from the dinner party video. There I was, mid-sentence, the television screen behind me frozen on my own injured face. I didn't flinch. A few hours later, the real shift began. Olive's phone started buzzing around 10. The county office called to confirm they had opened an inquiry into the forged deed. The notary in question was already under internal review. The State Housing Board sent a statement requesting a full review of the transfer since the house fell under protected veteran property. By noon, Ashley's social media pages had been locked down. Her last post, a photo from the night of the dinner with the caption, "Celebrating Family," was being flooded with comments. Most weren't kind. The group she partnered with for Clean Living brand deals issued a statement about re-evaluating their relationship with her due to ongoing investigations. By mid-afternoon, one of Reed's investor partners left a voicemail with Olive's office number. He had seen the footage and wanted to discuss the impact on a pending deal. Apparently, Reed had used the house as proof of liquid assets for a short-term equity flip. Now that the deed was in question, the deal was frozen. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. This wasn't revenge. This was exposure. Light on rot. And rot doesn't last long when the air hits it. Around 3, Olive's doorbell rang. I stood back while she answered it. "Miriam." She stood there with her backpack slung over one shoulder and a crumpled note in her hand. "My mum said I had to stay with you for a few days. She said it's just until everything calms down." I nodded and let her in. Her eyes scanned the room, settled on my face, then softened. Did I do the right thing? I placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did the brave thing. That's what matters." She went to the guest room without saying more. Later that evening, Olive and I reviewed the response timeline. Everything had moved faster than we expected. Faster than Reed and Ashley could catch up to. faster than they could bury or deny. We had used their own words, their own footage, their own signatures. They had built their lie with confidence, and now that confidence was collapsing. What came next was predictable. That night, Reed left a voicemail. It was clipped. Angry at first, then almost pleading. He said the footage didn't tell the whole story, said I was being manipulated, said Olive had poisoned my mind. He warned me this would hurt the family, that Miriam didn't need to be in the middle of this. He never once apologized. Ashley didn't call, but I heard from a friend of hers, a woman who used to volunteer with us at the clinic. She said Ashley had lost 2 sponsorships already, that her agency had advised her to go silent. I didn't respond to any of it. Instead, I sat with Miriam that night and helped her with her spelling homework. We had soup. We watched the Weather Channel. We folded laundry. It felt ordinary, which, after everything, felt extraordinary. By the time the sun went down, the house had quieted again. Olive was on the phone with a local legal clinic, arranging next steps. I stayed at the table, flipping through my old notebook. Every page I had filled with notes and dates and names now felt like pieces of a puzzle that had finally snapped together. The power was no longer in their hands. They could lie. They could spin. But they couldn't erase what had been recorded, what had been printed, what had been spoken. They had done this thinking no one would believe me, thinking no one would care. But now, they were the ones explaining, scrambling, falling, and I was still standing, a little bruised, but very, very clear. The letter came in a plain envelope, no return address, just my name in block letters. Inside was a typed notice from Reed's attorney. It was framed as a request for mediation, a thin attempt to save face, to make it look like this was just a family dispute that had gotten out of hand. But the wording was careful, cold. The message underneath was clear. Back off, or this gets worse. I handed the letter to Olive without saying a word. She read it once, then set it aside. Her response was as steady as always. That means it's working. The next morning, we got word that the fraud office had fast-tracked the review of the forged deed. They requested a formal affidavit from me, confirming the signature wasn't mine, and that I hadn't been present during the filing. Olive had already prepared the draft. I signed it at the kitchen table while Miriam ate her cereal quietly across from us. She didn't ask any questions. She didn't need to. She had seen enough. Later that day, Olive took Miriam out for ice cream. I stayed behind and called the guidance counselor at Miriam's school, a woman named Janine Carson. We had only met once during a holiday event years ago, but I remembered her voice. I remembered her warmth. She didn't sound surprised to hear from me. I explained that Miriam was staying with me, that there had been an incident, that I would be filing for temporary guardianship. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she told me she would flag the case for a wellness review. She said she had noticed changes in Miriam recently. Withdrawal, anxiety, signs that no one had addressed. It broke something in me to hear that. Not because it was new, but because it wasn't. Later that evening, Olive pulled up an article on her tablet, a follow-up piece from the Housing Rights blog. The headline was shorter this time. Victim or Villain, How One Family Tried to Rewrite the Law. They had posted screenshots of the deed transfer timeline. They linked directly to the state veteran housing code. They quoted a legal expert who said the case would likely set precedent. That night, I turned off my phone. I sat in the dark with a notebook and wrote one line over and over again. You will not erase me. The next morning, things moved faster than I expected. A call came from the county investigator. The notary whose name appeared on the deed had given a sworn statement that she had never met me. that she had been contacted by Reed online and paid in cash. Her license was being revoked. At noon, I received a formal notice from the housing department. The deed transfer was officially suspended pending legal review. That meant Reed could not use the house as collateral, could not sell, could not refinance, could not touch it. Ashley's name was now associated with a pending ethics investigation tied to a brand partnership she had failed to disclose. One of her old sponsorships, a home goods company with a glossy magazine presence, had issued a quiet termination notice. She was no longer listed on their affiliate page. I didn't feel triumph, just a deep settling, like sand finally reaching the bottom of a shaken jar. Around 5, a knock came at Olive's door. It was Miriam's teacher, Ms. Holloway, young, kind, the kind of person who crouches down to speak at a child's eye level. She said she had come on her own time. She had seen the footage, heard from other staff what had happened. She handed me a folder. Inside were printouts, notes Miriam had written during class, drawings. One was a picture of our kitchen table, me, Olive, and Miriam sitting together. The caption said, "This is what safe looks like." That night, I cried for the first time since this all began, not because I was afraid, but because the silence had been broken, and not just by me. Miriam had done it too. A child who had seen too much had chosen to draw safety instead of hiding from fear. That meant everything. The next day, Olive scheduled a formal filing with the family court. Temporary custody, protection order, emergency hearing, all of it in motion now. At the end of the week, we received the formal ruling from the fraud office. The deed had been declared void. Legally, the house never left my name. The damage they had done wasn't just to my body, it was to the life I had built, to the trust I had extended, to the quiet space I had allowed them into for too long. But the lie had collapsed. The paper trail was broken, the mask was gone, and I was still here. Reed and Ashley could issue statements, could call lawyers, could play victims, but they could no longer call me weak, because my silence had become a sword, and I had learned how to use it. The ruling made everything official. The house was mine. The fraud investigation had been closed in my favor. The forged deed struck from the record. Reed's signature disqualified. Ashley's name removed from any legal ownership. The structure they built on lies had been wiped away by a single document, signed and sealed by the county. But paper alone doesn't undo damage. The next wave came from the outside. Silent at first, then growing louder. Reed's brokerage firm issued a statement. They had been unaware of his involvement in the ongoing investigation, and after reviewing the evidence, they had chosen to part ways. His name was scrubbed from the website by nightfall. Ashley's fall was louder. A sponsored post she had scheduled a week earlier still went live. A video of her holding a smoothie in the same kitchen where she had broken my jaw. Comments flooded in. Thousands. People quoting the footage, linking to the blog article, calling her out for smiling on camera while privately trying to evict her husband's mother. By morning, the video had been taken down. By afternoon, her account was set to private, then gone entirely. One by one, their partnerships dissolved. A kitchen appliance brand unfollowed her. A cleaning product company removed her from their featured creators. A home decor magazine retracted a digital feature she had filmed just 2 months earlier. It wasn't public shaming, it was accountability. A mirror held up, finally in the daylight. Miriam stayed with us through all of it. She never asked to go back. She kept a quiet rhythm. School, homework, walks with Olive in the afternoon. She had stopped flinching when the phone rang. She started humming to herself while colouring. Some nights, I caught her looking at the door. Not afraid, just watchful. like she was waiting to see who might come through. But when no one did, she turned back to whatever she was doing and kept going. Olive handled most of the calls. Reporters, attorneys, even a law professor from the university reached out, said she wanted to include the case in her lectures about elder protection and housing rights. I didn't need the attention. I didn't want it. But I understood the value of letting it be known that this kind of thing happened, that it wasn't rare, that silence didn't mean nothing was wrong. Still, there was fallout beyond headlines. One of the neighbors who had attended the dinner sent a card, handwritten, apologized for not stepping in sooner, said she had noticed bruises before, but told herself it wasn't her place. She included her phone number, said if I ever needed help with anything, I could call. I didn't call. But I didn't throw the card away either. The silence from Reed stretched. No calls, no messages, just distance. I knew what that meant. He was regrouping, not for reconciliation, for recovery. He would wait for the noise to die down, then try to come back in a new shape, a softer voice, a rewritten history. But I would not forget, and I would not invite him back in. Then, at the end of the week, a letter arrived, not from Reed, from the school district. It was a notice of concern. They had received information from the counselor, from the teacher, from me. They were opening a welfare review for Miriam. Temporary guardianship could be extended, depending on the outcome. There would be interviews, home visits, a full assessment of emotional safety. I read it twice, folded it, set it on the table in front of Miriam. She read it quietly, then looked up and said one sentence. I want to stay here. So I filed the paperwork. That evening, Olive and I sat outside while Miriam watered the herbs in the small garden along the fence. Olive sipped her tea. I held the envelope in my lap. You didn't hesitate, she said. I shook my head. No more hesitating. Later, Olive showed me the latest article. The blog had run one final follow-up piece. What happens when a mother fights back? The image they used was of the kitchen window, the one that looked out onto the backyard. The caption underneath read, "A quiet home, reclaimed." It wasn't about me, not really. It was about what happens when silence ends. When someone who has been told to stay quiet decides to speak. When the one expected to step aside steps forward instead. The public side of it had slowed. No more statements, no more headlines. But the damage to their image was done. Not by me, by themselves. I had simply opened the door and let the truth out. And the truth had done what it always does. It changed the story, not for their benefit, but finally for mine. The hearing was held on a Tuesday morning. Family court, small courtroom, no jury, just the judge, a clerk, 2 attorneys, and a few rows of chairs meant for people who didn't plan to stay long. It wasn't about money, not that day. It was about guardianship. I wore black slacks, a pale blue blouse, and flats that wouldn't click against the tile. Olive sat beside me, her hands folded over a legal pad. Miriam sat quietly on the other side, her legs swinging just slightly beneath the bench. Reed sat across from us. He wore a navy blazer and a tie I had given him 2 Christmases ago. His lawyer whispered something in his ear. He didn't look at me. Not once. Ashley wasn't there. The judge entered and called the room to order. She was firm, composed, maybe late 50s, the kind of woman who had heard every kind of excuse already and no longer had patience for pretense. Olive handled the opening. She submitted our documentation. Medical reports, witness statements, school reports showing Miriam's behavior since moving in, a letter from her teacher, one from the school counselor, another from the neighbor who had offered to testify if needed. Reed's lawyer tried to paint a different picture. He spoke about disruption, about temporary emotional strain. He said Reed had made poor decisions under stress. He said families could heal. But the judge kept her expression still. When the recordings were mentioned, she paused. She asked if they had been reviewed by child welfare staff. They had. The findings were documented. The audio was entered as part of the record. Then the judge turned to Reed. She asked him one question: what steps he had taken to ensure Miriam's safety after the incident. He hesitated, then said that Ashley had been attending therapy, that he had stepped back from his investment work to focus on the family, that he had learned from this. The judge didn't react. She turned to me next. I didn't give a speech. I didn't cry. I said only what mattered. Miriam is safe in my home. She sleeps through the night now. She smiles. She hums. She draws pictures of us together. I am not interested in blame, only in protecting her peace. The judge nodded once, then recessed for 30 minutes. I sat still while she was gone. Reed leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. He still hadn't looked at me. When the judge returned, her voice was clear. Effective immediately, temporary guardianship is granted to Ivy Strickland, pending final review within 90 days. All visitation by the biological parents will require supervision and prior approval by the court. This ruling is based on the best interest of the child. Reed's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The clerk handed Olive the official copy of the order. We stood and left without a word. In the hallway, Miriam reached for my hand. I squeezed it gently. She didn't let go until we were outside. The sun was high, the sidewalk was hot beneath our shoes, but the air felt lighter than it had in weeks. Olive drove us home while I watched the buildings roll past the window. Grocery stores, bus stops, schools with peeling paint and bright murals. All the ordinary places where extraordinary things could happen, where trust could be broken and rebuilt, where survival could take root. That night, we didn't talk much. We had pasta and salad. Miriam read out loud from her homework packet. Olive went to bed early, her folders stacked beside her chair, ready for the next thing. I stayed up late, sitting by the window, looking out at the backyard. The porch light was dim, just enough to see the edges of the old oak tree and the garden patch Miriam had started with Olive. There were tomatoes now, tiny, green, still hard, but they were coming. Then I remembered something I hadn't thought of in years. When Reed was 6, he fell off the swing set and chipped his front tooth. He cried for a full hour, not because of the pain, but because he didn't want anyone to see the break. He was afraid of looking different, of not being whole. I had held him that night, told him a chipped tooth didn't mean less, that it was just part of growing. Now, years later, he had become someone who tried to break others to protect his own image, and I had become the one holding someone else who needed to feel safe. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I wasn't bitter. I was just awake. Finally, fully. Before bed, I opened the small fireproof box where I kept the originals. The house deed, my military service record, the letter from the grant program. I added the court order to the top. Then I closed the lid and slid it back into place. Not to hide it, to protect it. Because this wasn't about revenge, this was about restoration. And piece by piece, I was putting it all back where it belonged. A week after the hearing, I woke up to the sound of footsteps on the porch. For a second, my body reacted out of old memory. My spine stiffened. My hands curled slightly against the blanket. The soft creak of the wood sounded just like it did that night when Reed's voice had cut through the dark, calling for me with a threat buried in a question. But this time, it was Olive. She had come to drop off some documents for the caseworker scheduled to visit later that afternoon. Her steps were light, steady, and I could hear the sound of her thermos clink gently as she placed it on the kitchen counter. It was just morning, just a porch, just life continuing. Miriam was already up. She was brushing her hair at the kitchen table, a slice of toast beside her, half covered in raspberry jam. She wore a shirt with a small giraffe printed on the pocket, and little canvas sneakers. She insisted on tying herself now. She had changed. Not overnight, but slowly. The kind of change you only noticed when you stopped waiting for it. She no longer flinched at loud noises. She no longer whispered in apology after speaking. And she no longer asked if I needed help before doing anything. Now she just did it. Quietly, thoughtfully, on her terms. The house, too, felt different. It wasn't cleaner or brighter, though Olive had helped me rearrange the living room so sunlight came in easier in the morning. It was more that the air inside didn't feel tight. I could breathe without bracing. The caseworker's visit went as expected. She walked through the house, checked safety items, asked about routines. She interviewed Miriam privately, then returned with a soft smile and said she would file a favorable report. Later that evening, I found myself back in the garden. I was checking on the tomatoes. The green ones were starting to blush toward red. One had fallen and split slightly on the soil, but most were holding strong. It reminded me of Miriam in a way, a season turning. That night, I sat at the table with Olive and opened the envelope she had brought. It was the preliminary asset disclosure. Not for me, for Reed. His firm had filed it with the state after his termination. His income had dropped by 75%. Several accounts frozen pending civil review. Credit lines flagged. The investment properties he'd used as leverage were now under audit. Ashley had filed for legal separation 3 days prior. Olive didn't comment. She just handed me the rest of the folder. A notarized letter of apology from Ashley, delivered through her attorney. No direct contact allowed, by court order. The letter was clean, short, no denial, no excuses. Just one sentence that stayed with me. I see now what I helped him become. I folded it and placed it in the drawer. Not as forgiveness, not yet, but as proof that someone had looked in the mirror, finally. Olive stayed late that night. We sat with cups of warm cider, listening to the late crickets just outside the screen door. She said she'd been contacted by a small non-profit group, one focused on housing rights and elder safety. They'd read the article about the blog series. They wanted to know if I would consider speaking. Not on stage, just a video, a message, something for others like me. Women who had been cornered in their own homes, told to be grateful for less, trapped by shame, or loyalty, or silence. I said I'd think about it. That night, I dreamed of the old porch, not the night it all fell apart, but long before that. Back when I still had Reed in a sling on my hip, and the neighborhood kids would ride bikes up and down the street until the sun disappeared behind the trees. Back when the house was still mine in feeling, not just in deed. When I woke up, I went to the box again. I took out the old picture I had placed behind the papers, one of me in uniform, years before I became a mother. My hair pinned back tight, my eyes steady, my jaw unflinching. That girl had not disappeared. She had simply gone quiet for a while. Now she was back. By noon, I had called the non-profit and said yes. If my voice could hold up the wall for even one woman like me, it would be worth it. I didn't need applause. I just needed truth. And I had plenty of it now. Enough to speak without shaking. Enough to fill a room. The morning of the recording, I didn't eat much. Just a piece of toast and some tea. Olive showed up with her laptop and a small tripod. Miriam had left early with a neighbour to spend the afternoon at the park. We set up in the living room, where the light fell in long, soft streaks through the blinds. The same space that once held arguments too sharp to forget now sat in silence, calm and still. I wore a plain navy blouse and tied my hair back. It didn't feel like a performance. It felt like a reckoning. Olive sat across from me, but off camera, gently guiding the setup. When she pressed record, I didn't even hear the click. I just looked forward, straight into the lens, and spoke. I told the truth. Not the court version, not the sanitized timeline, but the truth as it settled in the bones. I spoke of silence, of how it begins small, an overlooked insult, a request ignored, a door left half closed, just enough to feel unwelcome. Then I spoke of the night my jaw broke, of the way the pain wasn't what hollowed me out most, but the way Reed had smiled, the way he had leaned against the counter, arms folded, like it was nothing more than me getting what I deserved. I didn't use his name, or hers. It wasn't about them now. It was about the slow-burning shame women carry when their own children turn cruel. It was about the way abuse changes shape with age. It's not always bruises. Sometimes it's paper trails, bank transfers, whispered threats that come in smiles and legalese. And then I told them what I did, how I stood up, how I used the very systems they tried to bury me with, and how, by the end, it wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming the right to live without fear under my own roof. The entire video was under 15 minutes. When we finished, Olive reached across and touched my hand. Just once. No words. By the end of that week, the non-profit posted the video on their page, and it travelled faster than I expected. First a few comments, then emails, then phone calls. One woman wrote from Ohio. She said her daughter-in-law had emptied her accounts while pretending to help her manage her prescriptions. Another woman in Colorado said her son hadn't let her open her own mail in years. And then there was a message from a retired nurse in Florida. She said my words felt like someone had finally spoken out loud what she'd never dared to admit, even to herself. The stories weren't new, but the silence was starting to crack. Meanwhile, Reed's situation worsened. His name had been passed to several oversight boards, not because of me directly, but because his firm had begun reviewing their internal cases after the public backlash. A blog picked up the thread, then a news column. No photos, but they referenced an anonymous elder abuse case that started it all. By the second month, Reed had lost 2 more streams of income. The last rental property had gone into foreclosure. Ashley had filed for full custody of their daughter. He tried reaching out once, not to me, but through a third-party mediator, an old family friend. He said he wanted a conversation, closure. I declined. There was nothing left to close, no door to shut. It had already been leveled and rebuilt with locks of my own choosing. Instead, I focused on Miriam's school enrollment. She was officially placed into a new district. Closer to us, smaller class sizes, a counselor assigned to her transition. Olive helped fill out the paperwork. I watched as Miriam signed her own name in careful, slanted letters on the last page. She smiled, not the small, polite smile she used to hide in corners, but a wide, toothy grin, the kind that reached her eyes. It was her first real day back in the world, and I wasn't about to miss it. That afternoon, I packed us both a small picnic. We sat beneath the shade of an oak tree just outside the school building. She told me about the classroom colours, about a girl named Zoe who had the same lunchbox, about the way the teacher smiled when she pronounced her own name clearly during roll call. I didn't speak much. I just listened. Because for the first time in a long time, The world around me wasn't filled with the echoes of old hurts. It was filled with her voice, her future, and the sound of my own heart, finally steady, finally at peace. Fall came early that year. The leaves outside turned in bursts of red and amber, and every morning I opened the windows just to let the wind speak for a while. It carried no bitterness, just coolness, just change. There were no more emergency calls. No letters slipped under my door. No sudden knocks asking for favors masked as concern. Only quiet. And quiet, I learned, is not the same as loneliness. The final ruling from the property board arrived that Thursday. Clean, concise, final. The house belonged to me. Fully. No caveats, no appeals pending. I folded the letter once and set it in the drawer beside my bed. I didn't need to frame it. I didn't need to dance around with it held high. Just knowing it was mine, that I wasn't a guest in the life I built, was enough. Reed's name hadn't come up in weeks. Olive said he had taken a consulting job out of state, low profile, short term. Ashley had moved to her sister's place with her daughter. Their marriage, according to court records, had been dissolved quietly. There were no headlines, no press coverage, no public spectacle. That's how real endings happen sometimes, not with fanfare, but with absence. Miriam adjusted well. Her drawings were taped all over the fridge. She now picked out her own outfits and tied her shoes. On weekends, she rode her scooter down the sidewalk while Olive and I watched from the porch with hot tea in hand. I didn't talk about the past much, not because I couldn't, but because I didn't need to anymore. There was a morning, though, just before Thanksgiving, when I found an envelope in the mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single folded note, no more than a sentence. It read, "You did what I couldn't. You got out. I'm proud of you." It was signed only with an old nickname I hadn't heard in decades, my sister's. She had disappeared from my life 30 years ago, left the country, cut ties, faded into mystery. For so long I had believed she had chosen silence. But maybe she was just trying to survive too. Maybe we both were. I pressed the note to my chest for a moment. No tears, just warmth. I never heard from her again. That one line was enough. On Christmas Eve, Miriam placed a small box in my hands. No ribbon, just her smile. Inside was a bracelet, handmade. Purple beads, strung unevenly, with a tiny silver charm shaped like a house. I didn't say anything. I just hugged her. And that was that. It wasn't justice that saved me. It wasn't some grand reckoning. It was knowing when to stop waiting for apologies that would never come. When to stop asking for love that had been withheld too long. It was letting go of a version of motherhood that only gave and never received. It was choosing to speak, and choosing, after everything, to still be kind, but only on my terms. The house stayed quiet that night, but my heart didn't. It beat clear, unburdened, certain. Some endings look like a locked courtroom. Some look like a girl on a scooter laughing down the street. Mine looked like both. And I was finally home in it. If any part of my story reminded you of something in your own life, I hope you know this. Your silence doesn't define you. The moment you decide you're done shrinking, that's the moment the story starts to shift. Have you ever walked away from someone who made you feel small for far too long, or found a voice you didn't know you had? I'd love to hear from you in the comments. You're not alone, even if it feels that way. Sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest truths. And sometimes healing begins with just one story.